This is the Ottawa Senators Outlook. Here is your host, Jack Henry.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Ottawa Senators Outlook. I'm your host, Jack. This is my series preview for the Toronto Maple Leafs first round playoff series, so let's get right to it. So, as most of you know, the Ottawa Senators clinched a playoff spot for the first time since 2017, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, for the first time ever, have won the Atlantic Division, so that means we are getting a Battle of Ontario playoff series, something we haven't had since 2004, so it's been a little bit since these two teams have played in the playoffs. Just for brief information, Game 1 is obviously going to be Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Game 2 is expected to be Tuesday night at 7:30. Game 3, the first one in Ottawa, will be on Thursday night at 7. Game 4 will be Saturday night at 7. And then we don't know what the times would be if the series goes past 4 games. But anyways, a possible Game 5 would be Tuesday, April 29th. Game 6 in Ottawa would be Thursday, May 1st. And Game 7 would be Saturday, May 3rd. And obviously, as you know, the Maple Leafs have home ice advantage in this series. They will be at Scotiabank Arena for Games 1, 2, 5, and 7. The Senators would have home ice in Games 3, 4, and 6. So hopefully Sens fans could get as many tickets as they can, because it really does seem like Leafs fans are going to pack the Canadian Tire Center like they usually do. So, again, that would maybe be an advantage for the Leafs. I mean, the Senators did sweep the Maple Leafs in the regular season. It was 3-0 in favor of the Senators, but we're just going to get into a little bit more information between these two teams. The Ottawa Senators are 45-30-7. They finished with 97 points, and the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 52-26-4. So they finished with a total of 108 points. So right now, for the stat leaders, William Nylander had 45 goals, Brady Tkachuk had 29, Mitch Marner had 75 assists, Tim Stützle had 55, Joseph Woll with 27 wins, and Linus Ullmark with 25. So for the team rankings and goals for, the Leafs were 7th with 267, the Senators were 18th with 242. Goals against, the Leafs were 8th with 229, the Senators were 13th with 232. Assists, the Maple Leafs were 8th with 443. The Senators were 20th with 405. On the power play, the Maple Leafs were 8th with a 24.8. The Senators were 11th with a 23.8. On the penalty kill, the Maple Leafs were 17th with a 77.9. The Senators were 19th with a 77.7. Penalty minutes, the Maple Leafs were 14th with 644. The Senators were 20th with 696. And on the shooting percentage, the Leafs were 5th with a .116, and the Senators were 24th with a .101. So the Senators just got over .1, so there you go. As most of you know, like I just said, the Senators won the regular season series 3-0. The Toronto Maple Leafs have made the playoffs every year since Austin Matthews got drafted in 2016-17, which was obviously the last time the Senators made the playoffs. They are now the longest tenured team to just consistently make the Stanley Cup playoffs after the Boston Bruins got eliminated this year. There's a lot of factors that really go into the series, to be quite honest with you. I think the top 6 is definitely in favor of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I just think that's a fact. I also do believe that the Senators, they do have a very solid top 6 as well. I will pull up the lines for both of these teams just so you can get a bit of brief information, but I do think if you know both of these teams pretty well, you pretty much know what these lines are going to look like. Let's start with the Ottawa Senators here just to quickly get through it. Right now, the Senators are rolling with a top line of Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, and Claude Giroux. Their second line right now is David Perron, Dylan Cousins, and Drake Batherson. Their third line is Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, and Michael Amadio. And their fourth line is Nick Cousins, Adam Gaudette, and Fabian Zetterlund. So Zetterlund is on the bottom line once again. He did look good when he was with Tim Stützle, even on that second line. So he's definitely a guy that you might see move up and down the lineup depending on in-game adjustments, depending on how the series might go game after game. But I definitely think Fabian Zetterlund won't be on the bottom line for that much longer. But you could use him as a Swiss Army knife. Gaudette, got a couple goals here and there at the end of the year. He had a really hot start. That's why he got up to 20 goals. But second half of the year, he was pretty silent. And then you're getting Nick Cousins back, which is huge in my opinion, because you saw what he did with the Florida Panthers. Obviously, he is a Stanley Cup champion. Bottom line, this is going to be a really physical series, I feel. I think that's really what gives the Senators an advantage is their physicality. They can definitely push over the Toronto Maple Leafs. So having Nick Cousins in that lineup is huge. And then obviously, you have Brady Tkachuk, who's going to be in the playoffs for the first time in his career. And I think all Sens fans can pretty much say we're excited to see what Brady Tkachuk can do in the playoffs. David Perron, Dylan Cousins, Drake Batherson, that second line has been phenomenal ever since Dylan Cousins came over in that trade with Buffalo. I think you've really seen Drake Batherson kind of revive his offense because he just looked like a liability on the ice, and you saw me talk about it right here so many times. Dylan Cousins really revived Drake Batherson, and you got to give him a lot of credit here. And then David Perron as well. David Perron, obviously, he had a lot of issues in the first half of the season, but second half, I think it's been a tale of 2 seasons, if you want to say that, for David Perron. Perron has looked pretty awesome in the second half, and having him on that second line has been pretty solid too. That third line, Greg, Pinto, and Amadio, I don't have to say anything. They've been a really consistent shutdown line. You're going to get physicality from Greg as well. Amadio could once in a while, so I'm excited to see that. My only issue is Claude Giroux on that top line if he struggles right out the gate, because I think his age is starting to show in his play. He really hasn't been what he was over the first 2 years of his contract, but he's still a very solid player, but again, he's just not what he was. And then if it gets to that point, you could obviously put Fabian Zetterlund on Sutzler's wing, and you saw what Zetterlund can do there. Anyways, let's get to the blue line here. Jake Sanderson with Artem Zub. There's really nothing that needs to be said here. Thomas Chabot and Nick Jensen. Nick Jensen, I think, has been really solid overall. His second half obviously wasn't as good as his first, but I think that top 4 overall is pretty solid. And then the bottom pair is really the big one, which Tyler Klevin is paired with Nicholas Mentapalo, which is really big in my opinion because I don't think Sens fans could lose the game if Travis Hamonic is in the lineup. Granted, I do think Hamonic can play well against the Leafs. We've seen him against the Leafs. He's done pretty well, but I don't think he's going to cut it in a 7-game series. He's just not the guy that he was. And then you also have Dennis Gilbert. That can be a depth guy. He's going to be pretty physical as well. You're going to see that definitely from Klevin and Matt and Paolo, most definitely. So that's going to be pretty exciting. And then obviously the big one, our starting goaltender, Linus Ullmark. Ullmark was in the playoffs for the last 3 seasons with the Boston Bruins. He hasn't looked phenomenal when he got playoff starts. So hopefully you can kind of see a bit of a bounce back effort from him in the playoffs. And then you obviously have Anton Forsberg, who's been pretty up and down. Not a guy that I'd want to start, but the Senators did call up Leevi Merilainen, so I definitely think you could see Merilainen get some backup minutes if you need them. The Belleville Senators did miss the playoffs, so that is pretty big for the Ottawa Senators because you're going to get a lot of guys. You're going to see like Angus Crookshank up, and you're just going to see maybe even Stephen Holiday. And depending on what happens in the WHL, there is a possibility that Carter Yakimchuk can be up, but I'm not really going to bet on that. But either way, the Senators, they have a lot of depth guys, and the depth overall is just a lot better than what it was. So I think the Senators do have some internal options here. So that's a lot of credit to Steve Staios because he said, like, the depth is really what we need, and he's really built that. So give credit there. But with that, we are going to go to the Toronto Maple Leafs now, and this is honestly a little bit more obvious, if anything. The top line right now consists of Matthew Nyes, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner. No surprises there. I think all 3 guys, at least in the regular season, are pretty solid. I mean, if you ask Leaf fans, Mitch Marner is a conversation, but again, we'll have to see. Maybe he changes it in the playoffs. Max Domi next to John Tavares and William Nylander. Bobby McMahon next to Holmberg and Nick Robertson in that bottom line of Steve Lawrence, Scott Lawton, and Calle Yarncroke. For the defensive pairs, you have Jake McCabe next to Chris Tanev, Morgan Riley next to Brandon Carlo, and I will say that Brandon Carlo addition has been pretty huge for the Leafs. I think it really completes their top 4, if anything. I don't really think we've seen, I would say, a solid top 4 from the Leafs, at least in a while, in my opinion. At least having some guys on the right side next to Morgan Riley and Jake McCabe. And then, obviously, on the bottom pair, you're going to have Benoit and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. You do have a couple guys for depth. I know you have, what was his name? Myers there as well. You have Hagenpan, IR, Pacioretty as well. A guy that is day-to-day is David Kampf, so we'll see what happens there. But from what I heard from Leafs fans, I mean, I don't think they're big fans of David Kampf, especially on the contract that he's on. But overall, there's a reason this team won the division, and there is a reason why the Leafs are as good as they are in the regular season. Obviously, they have a new coach in Craig Berube, won the Stanley Cup with the St. Louis Blues in 2019, so He's replacing Sheldon Keefe, who is now in New Jersey coaching the Devils, getting his team ready for the playoff series against the Carolina Hurricanes. I definitely believe Craig Berube is a massive upgrade over Sheldon Keefe. I think, and I pretty much made this comparison a lot. I think Sheldon Keefe is just DJ Smith that just makes the playoffs. I really do feel that way. And then Craig Berube, I mean, the Senators were looking into hiring as the coach, but he came out pretty expensive. The details of the contract that Craig Berube's on aren't really public, but you can pretty much assume that he was just getting offered a lot more money with the Leafs than he was with the Senators. And obviously the Senators coach is Travis Green, who I did say at some point, like a while ago, he is a Walmart version of Craig Berube. I do think they have the same attitude towards the game, but Craig Berube is just well more established as a coach. I'm really excited for this series. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs, as most of you know, have made it to the second round one time in the last 21 years. And the time they won a series was obviously the 2022-23 season. They beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in 6 games. And I did correctly predict in my bracket that year that the Maple Leafs would win a playoff series. And I don't like picking the Maple Leafs in playoff series. And all of you know that. I'm not a big fan of the Leafs. But I definitely knew they had what it took to win that series. And I was right there. As most of you know, they did lose to the Washington Capitals in 2017 in 6 games. And then I don't think I need to explain myself even more. In 2018 and 2019, they lost to the Bruins in 7 games. They lost in Game 5 of the qualifying round to the Blue Jackets in 2020. That was the bubble year. In 2021, with the North Division that they actually won. But to be honest, that really doesn't count, and Leafs fans have been saying that as far as I've heard. They were up 3-1 in that series, and they choked it away to the Montreal Canadiens, who ended up going to the Stanley Cup Finals that year. Losing to the Lightning. Lightning won back-to-back cups. Speaking of the Lightning, that's who the Maple Leafs lost to in 2022 in the first round. The Lightning won that in 7 games. Obviously, the Leafs won in 6 games to the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2023, but then they lost to the Florida Panthers in 5 games in 2023, who reached the Stanley Cup Finals that year. Nick Cousins actually, for a fun fact, had that game-winning goal of the series, and Nick Cousins is an Ottawa Senator now. And then in obviously 2024... the Boston Bruins beat Toronto in 7 games on an overtime goal by David Pastrnak. Just flashback PTSD from 2013 with Patrice Bergeron. So just based off that, you could probably tell the Leafs aren't successful in the playoffs, let alone in the first round, except 2023. I will be honest, I'm a little nervous if the Leafs do win this series because I can definitely tell you this. Sens fans are not going to hear the end of this from Leafs fans because, again, it's the Battle of Ontario. But the Senators have what it takes to make this a competitive series. I definitely see this series, without a doubt, going at least 6 games. But I do think the longer the series goes, the more advantage it has for the Ottawa Senators. I think the Ottawa Senators, especially later on, I look at that Carolina Hurricanes game for an example. I think the Ottawa Senators, they kept in it. Even when they were up 3 goals, they let their foot off the gas, and that is a big concern of mine. They just have to keep the momentum going because it will bite you in the rear end in the playoffs. The Sens found themselves down 5-3, but they came back and won 7-5. They're going to have to do a lot of that. They seem pretty comfortable, and the Sens, bottom line, the team looks ready for the playoffs, and I'm really excited to see how they perform against the Maple Leafs, who I think is their best shot at winning a playoff series because I don't think they're beating Tampa or Florida in a 7-game series, and I don't think they have enough to beat the Washington Capitals, even though that was pretty competitive in the regular season. With that said, the Toronto Maple Leafs, I feel like have a different mindset with Craig Berube as their coach, but the culture overall changed with the Ottawa Senators. They love playing as the underdog, and like I said, the longer the series goes, I think the more advantage it has for the Ottawa Senators. So I hope I don't get clipped by this by Leafs fans. But I have the Ottawa Senators winning the series in 7 games. I really think the Senators have what it takes to beat the Maple Leafs in this series, as long as they just keep playing the way they've been playing, the way they know they can shut down the Maple Leafs, because we've seen the Senators have their number. I think that this series will go to 7 games, and the Ottawa Senators will be the ones to just come out on top. It's going to be a really exciting series. I'm really excited for the series. So let's go. Battle of Ontario, here we are. So I will have my recap to Game 1 coming out after Game 1 on Sunday, so be on the lookout for that. Comment down below your thoughts and predictions for our first round series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I will see you for the Game 1 recap. So anyways, like and subscribe. But for now, this is Jack Nicholson, and Go Sens Go.
Thank you for watching this presentation of the Ottawa Senators Outlook. For more of this podcast, click on the videos on the left, and subscribe by clicking on the icon on the right. Thank you.